Transmuting sexual shame. Recently, I went to my first sex party. Truth be told, I didn't know when I bought a ticket to the event that it was going to be a sex party. I was imagining something like a variety of offerings centered around sensual exploration and a consensual playground for exploring one's edges. Even though I work in the field of sacred sexuality, I'd never been in a situation where group sex was happening. My work is focused on teaching individuals how to harness their sexual energy to heal physical and emotional symptoms, creative blocks, and relationship and intimacy issues. And while I've been in many group contexts where we exchange sexual energy through different practices, such as eye gazing, synchronized breathing, and body worship, the intention was not to have sex. I learned a few important things about myself that night, which I'll share more about later. However, I will say, one thing that surprised me was how completely normal and comfortable it felt for me to be surrounded by people having sex right next to me. While I was engaged in deep philosophical conversations with others who, like me, have chosen the path of sacred sexuality as their preferred path of healing and transformation, there were multiple couples on either side of me performing a variety of sex acts. While I was enjoying the sumptuous spread of delightful treats and the spectacular cityscape view, others were hedonistically exploring in a safe and sober container the pleasures of the body. I grew up in a situation where I was highly aware of the daily shame I felt around my sexual expression. I was always very comfortable being naked as a child. My comfort seemed to provoke discomfort in my parents. I did not grow up with a religious background or in a strict setting, and it always surprised me and was eventually confusing and hurtful when they used jokes to stave off their discomfort comparing me as a 6-year-old to a famous stripper at the time. Alongside this, I had a birth father who used to take me to strip clubs when I was not much older. I didn't explore my sexuality with other kids much, but I remember a time that for years I felt shame about. I was playing with a neighborhood boy, and we were maybe 6 or 7. We were both curious to see one another's genitals and did an innocent, you show me yours and I'll show you mine game. Just having curiosity and then daring to show one another induced a deep sense of shame that flavored many future sexual interactions. Later, as a young adult, I would come to punish myself by shutting down my curiosity to explore with a swift judgment of self-shaming before I tried anything, or immediately after I did. By the time I hit puberty, things escalated rapidly, leading me to experiencing ongoing intense public shaming among my peers and around the suburban town I lived in for the duration of my middle school era. I could go into the gory details that took me years to unravel and decades to integrate the trauma that occurred to arrive at the place where sexual shame had mostly subsided. But let's return to the sex party instead. You see, inside of me, I felt on the one hand sexually liberated, empowered, capable, and connected. And on the other hand, I was aware of this little prude inside of me that felt uncomfortable at the thought of people having sex in public, where I could see it. And when I realized people were likely going to be having sex, I felt a swell of fear arise to the extent that I had an inner voice telling me not to go. This was not the all-knowing, intuitive voice I was well accustomed to. This was the voice of fear, of challenging a limiting belief I have, of taking a leap into the unknown. Fortunately, I was also accustomed to this voice and could therefore discern between the two. My resistance had subsided for the week between when I found out there would be sex and the night of the event. It came on again full force a few hours before the party. My mind was thinking of a whole host of excuses why I should not go. I knew that I needed to double down on my commitment to going just to get myself out the door. You see, one of the biggest gifts that happened for me that night was realizing this inner prude, judgmental voice was a very old voice that did not even belong to me. And it had been with me all these years, interfering with my confidence in fully expressing my wild, raw, passionate sexual self. When I was at the party and I felt absolute neutrality at being there, I realized that I just dissolved one of the last remaining tendrils of sexual shame that was inhibiting my psyche. This internal shift led to another very important external shift, specifically in how I talked about my work. I realized that for a long time I'd been choosing language that was not as direct and clear as it could be to talk about how I teach others to use their sexual energy to heal. As I reflected upon this, I believe there was still a fear of public shaming that I was hesitant to subject myself to again. But here's the thing. We all experience shame, and sexual shame is among the highest on the list of shameful topics. When I was at that party, I did a practice of personifying the judgmental, prude part of me that wanted to maintain safety by keeping myself small using self-shaming. This practice of fully embodying the role of a self-sabotaging part and getting into the pleasure of what it's like to fully own being it was discussed by Dr. Carolyn Elliott in her book, Existential Kink. I'd done this practice many times on my own, but doing it in a group was powerful. It helped to remind me again of how we all carry shame and fear as a part of the human experience. And when we take a step toward vulnerability with others, we begin to realize ways we build up resistance, fear, and hesitation based on past stories of ourselves that can be dissolved in an instant. The sexual shame that we carry, be it by our life experiences, our ancestral transmissions, cultural messaging, our sexual orientation, our preferences, leads to a fear of something so essential that it is as nourishing and necessary as the air we breathe and the water we drink. And that is the fear of intimacy, and more specifically, loving touch. For example, it's not uncommon for couples who are happily married otherwise to have sexless relationships with little to no loving touch. And to clarify, by intimacy, I'm referring to a broader use of the term than just sex, to include vulnerable, open-hearted connection with oneself and others. Fear of intimacy is prevalent, and most have no idea how to change their life circumstances to get what they desire most: connection. So, how do we get the courage to face the most tender parts of ourselves that keep us afraid of intimate connection? There are various ways, and I'll share a few powerful practices that have transformed my life. The first is getting in touch with what it is you truly desire. I don't mean what you want from another person, but in relationship to yourself. We're often afraid to open ourselves, to let our desires be heard. We have long suppressed them from traumatic experiences, being repeatedly shut down or shamed or dismissed, and an overall believing deep within our cores that we're unworthy of having what we desire. It can be a tender journey that requires patience to soften enough to hear the whispers of desires that lie dormant within the caverns of our hearts. I began a practice of listening for my desires and then honoring them with taking supportive action years ago, and it was hard. For a long time, I had no idea what I wanted. I'd become an exceptionally skilled chameleon that I unconsciously used as an impenetrable defense strategy to protect my broken heart. I worked with a fantastic somatic psychotherapist and did EMDR for sexual trauma integration. Side note, to learn more about the EMDR, you can check out The Body Keeps the Score by Besser Vander Kolk. I also use strategies frequently, like Richard Schwartz's internal family systems model, to recognize fractured parts of me and learn to hear my needs and tend to them. And I also explored pleasure play. This can be done solo or with others. Barbara Correas offers many practices to explore pleasure play in their book Urban Tantra. Pleasure play can help you get in touch with the type of touch and sensations that feel pleasurable, not because you're conditioned or convincing yourself that they feel good, but to move through those layers into an authentic knowing of what feels pleasurable specifically to you. It's an opportunity to work with layers of sexual shame, both the shame you're aware of as well as that which lies dormant. Another practice I'll call softening into surrender. This is a practice of getting comfortable with uncomfortable sensations that arise within, as well as with challenging emotions like shame. And rather than resisting them, seeing them as messengers. For example, when you feel tightness in your throat, jaw, chest, solar plexus, try pausing and gently breathing into the places of tension, letting each breath be an invitation to soften and allow. As you soften, you may feel emotions arise you were not conscious of. This is an opportunity to express them, to soothe the nervous system, or to explore what is at the root of the emotion or sensation. This type of listening to the sensations in your body builds a relationship of self-trust and safety within. It's key to learn some basics on how to soothe the autonomic nervous system so you can not perceive intimacy as a threat. Stephen Porges developed the polyvagal theory that demonstrated how activating the ventral vagal part of the nervous system allows us to feel safe within ourselves and with others. Some ways this can be achieved is by slowing down, breathing deep, gentle breaths, mindful awareness of body sensations, taking breaks if you feel overwhelmed, and creating a soothing external environment. If you want to geek out more on this theory, you can check out Porges' article called The Science of Safety. Lastly, I'll touch on esoteric teachings of mystical sexuality. I'm a practitioner for the past 16 years of the Taoist lineage of mystical sexuality. The tantric teachings that come out of ancient India are very similar with Taoist teachings, with Taoism having an emphasis on harmonizing our inner masculine and feminine principles through our connection with nature. Tantra does this through using deities and mantras. While these practices of learning how to use sexual energy for health and vitality can get quite technical and complex, the foundational practices are easily accessible. They require little effort to implement them, and they have huge health benefits. In the book Healing Love Through the Tao, Thai Grandmaster Mantak Chia, who many decades ago brought this wisdom to the West, shared a simple practice called the microcosmic orbit that not only regulates your hormonal and nervous systems, which have huge beneficial health implications, it's also a great place to begin cultivating subtler energetic awareness, to experience what it feels like to be connected within yourself versus dissociated or disconnected. In conclusion, while there has been a trend in the rise of interest in mystical sexual practices over the past 40 years that could be dismissed as faddism, beneath lies something profound, a longing for the meaningfulness of lived experience beyond the imprisonments of our egotism. Tantric and Taoist lineages, among many other esoteric traditions, teach that human sexuality is something far beyond biological arousal. Sexual activities can be profound spiritual practices that allow us to go beyond our perceptions of what we think is possible again and again. It is one of the greatest gifts of being human. Through our bodies, we get to remember our divinity. Through our pleasure, we get to feel our interconnectivity with all life. It's a beautiful irony. That which causes so much shame for many of us is also the vehicle for us to remember and experience the greatest love of all.